The widow was going 70 miles per hour when she realized it. The Mercedes-Benz steering wheel started losing control. 15 tons of steel rolling down Georgia's steepest mountain pass, and the steering just died in her hands. 5 veteran drivers had sworn the truck was cursed. 3 shops refused to touch it, and now she was alone in that cab, feeling the weight of the cargo pushing the vehicle downhill while the steering wheel spun loose, useless. In that moment, with the deadly curve approaching way too fast, she finally understood why they called that Mercedes the Widowmaker. Because every driver who faced that descent came out swearing they'd never go back, if they made it out alive. But what nobody knew was that this woman wasn't there by chance, and the secret she was about to discover about that truck would change everything. My friend, subscribe now to the Underrated Mechanics channel so you don't miss this incredible story. Hit that like button and comment down below what city or state you're watching from. I want to know where you're following me from. Agora vou continuar como roteiro completo adaptado. You've heard about those vehicles that earn a bad reputation, right? It's not just about an old model or high mileage, no. It's something heavier, you know? A history that sticks to the chassis, that passes from owner to owner as if the metal held memory. Well, my dear friends, that was exactly the case with the Mercedes-Benz 1850, which arrived that August morning at Red Clay Trucking in Dalton, Georgia, in the heart of the Appalachian foothills. The truck was 32 years on the road, white paint already faded by the southern sun, and carried on its back a reputation that made even veteran drivers refuse hauls. The story began 3 years earlier, when it was still running for Chattanooga Logistics. 5 different drivers, serious people who knew the road like the back of their hand, reported the same thing: loss of steering on long descents. 3 loads were damaged, losses of tens of thousands of dollars. And the last driver, Gerald, a 60-year-old man who had never wrecked a vehicle in his life, swore on his life that the steering wheel took on a life of its own going down Lookout Mountain. The company didn't want to hear any stories. They sold the Mercedes for 1/3 of market value, practically giving it away just to get rid of the problem. And get this interesting thing, since then the truck had gone through 4 different owners. 4. And all of them gave up on it after feeling that same inexplicable instability that turned every trip into too dangerous a gamble. That's when Sebastian Moore, owner of Red Clay Trucking, saw the truck at a vehicle auction in Atlanta. The price was so low it seemed like a joke. Sebastian was a businessman. He saw opportunity where others saw only risk. He bought the Mercedes for almost nothing, thinking any good shop could solve the problem. After all, a truck is a machine, right? And machines have logic, have cause and effect, have solutions. He brought the vehicle to Dalton on a hot July afternoon, towed because nobody wanted to drive it. He tried 3 shops in town. The first one, George's Garage, specialized in heavy vehicles, refused immediately. The head mechanic, old George, a man in coveralls always dirty with grease and 40 years of experience, looked at the truck from afar and shook his head. "That one I won't touch, Sebastian. Cursed trucks don't have fixes." The second shop, Star Automotive, sent a guy to do diagnostics. The guy came back 2 hours later with the same story. "Boss, I tested every steering system and everything checks out. This problem is something we don't understand." The third shop, specialized in suspension, didn't even want to see the truck after hearing the history. The owner was direct. "Sebastian, you're my friend, so I'm going to tell you the truth. That Mercedes has been through so many good hands that if nobody found the defect, it's because the defect ain't where we're looking. I'm not putting my name on that." Sebastian started regretting the purchase. The truck was parked in the yard, taking up space, becoming a joke among the drivers, until one Tuesday morning, while drinking coffee in the office, looking out the window at that white Mercedes that seemed to mock him, there was a knock on the door. It was Margaret Hayes. She was 32 years at the bench, same age as the truck. She had started at 15 in her father's shop, the late Robert Hayes, who had a small garage near the truck stop on I-75. Margaret learned everything from an early age: to hear an engine sound and know where the problem was, to feel in her hand the texture of a burnt gasket, to smell oil and identify if it was contaminated. When her father passed away from a heart attack 5 years ago, she took over the shop. But 6 months after burying her husband in a car accident, a drunk driver on Highway 41, the financial blow was too much. Medical bills, funeral costs, and grief made her lose focus. The shop went under. She sold everything just to pay debts and started working as an independent mechanic, taking odd jobs, doing consulting, accepting the challenges others avoided. Margaret was known in town, not just because she was a widow, though that always drew sympathy, but because she had that rare talent of seeing beyond the obvious. She didn't see an engine as a bunch of parts put together. She saw it as a living organism that breathed, heated, reacted to time and effort. "Mr. Moore," she said, standing in the doorway with a tool bag slung over her shoulder, still wearing the simple black dress she'd been wearing for months. "I heard about the Mercedes you bought. They say nobody wants to touch it." Sebastian stood up from his chair, tired just thinking about it. "That's right, Margaret. 3 shops already refused. They say it's a haunted truck, that it has a problem that technique can't solve. I'm starting to believe it." Margaret smiled in that calm way of hers, like someone who had heard similar stories before. "Mr. Moore, I don't believe in haunted trucks. I believe in poorly diagnosed problems. Let me take a look. If I don't find anything, you don't pay anything. But if I do find something, we'll talk." Sebastian hesitated, not because he doubted her ability. He knew Margaret's work, knew she was good, maybe the best in the region. But he feared that failure would tarnish the widow's reputation even more. If not even the big shops had succeeded, how could an independent do it? "Margaret," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I respect your work too much, but this truck has been through a lot of competent people. I don't want you to burn your name for nothing." She walked into the office, pulled up a chair, and sat in front of him. Her eyes had that determination that doesn't accept no. "Mr. Moore, reputation isn't built doing easy things. It's built solving exactly what seems impossible. And if there's one thing I learned from my father, and from losing him and my husband too soon, it's that trucks aren't haunted. Trucks are honest. If it has a problem, the problem is they're waiting for someone who knows how to look properly." Sebastian was silent for a moment, then nodded. "All right, you've got a week. Need anything? I need you to get me all the previous reports, every technical complaint registered, every documented repair attempt, and I need nobody to bother me while I work." The next morning, with the sun still low, warming the irregular asphalt of the trucking yard, Margaret began. The Mercedes had been parked for months, white paint faded, holding layers of red Georgia clay dust. The tires were flat, the hood covered by that fine layer of dirt that the wind brings and sticks to everything. She walked completely around the truck, just observing, not touching anything yet. She opened the cabin door and climbed in. Smell of mildew, leather seat cracked by the sun, dusty dashboard. She put the key in the ignition and turned it. The Detroit diesel 6-cylinder engine woke up with that deep, powerful roar, vibrating the entire cabin. Margaret sat there just listening, feeling the vibration in her body, watching the dashboard. The engine was healthy, no strange noise, no abnormal shaking. She got down and opened the hood. The engine heat started rising, bringing that characteristic smell of heated oil mixed with metal. She checked fluid levels, observed hoses, touched each component, everything apparently normal. She then grabbed the folder of documents that Sebastian had separated, sat in the shade of an oak tree in the yard, and started reading page by page, every maintenance report, every complaint registered by previous drivers. And it was there, in that silence of reading, that Margaret began to notice a pattern that nobody had seen before. What Margaret was reading in that folder weren't just cold technical reports. They were stories of frustration, of competent people who had tried and failed, of drivers with fear, of mechanics giving up. But there was something there, hidden between the lines, that started jumping out at her, like a light blinking on the dashboard. The first report was from driver Gerald, that 60-year-old gentleman who had sworn the steering wheel gained a life of its own on Lookout Mountain. He described, left Dalton at 6 a.m., loaded 15 tons of cotton bales, rode smooth until the mountain. When I started going down, about 40 minutes after leaving, the steering started getting loose. The more I went down, the worse it got. In the end, it felt like I was driving a boat in rough seas. The second report was from a driver named Jim, who worked for Chattanooga Logistics. Took the truck to do Atlanta-Nashville. First 30 miles, everything fine. Then I got into the descent near Monteagle, and the truck started floating on the road. Had to stop. Thought it was a tire, but it wasn't nothing. Waited about 20 minutes, started riding again, and the problem disappeared for a while. Then it came back. Third report, driver Eddie. The problem only appears when the truck heats up good. In city, on short trips, it works perfect. But put it on the highway, running heavy, that's when hell breaks loose. Margaret stopped reading and closed her eyes. Heats up good, running heavy. 40 minutes of travel, descents. The pattern was there screaming, but nobody had connected the dots. All the previous mechanics had worked with the truck parked or doing short tests on ramps with the engine still cold or barely heated. Nobody had tested the vehicle in real road conditions. Heat. She opened the folder again and looked for the maintenance reports. The first shop had replaced the entire hydraulic steering system. Pump, hoses, reservoir. Cost $8,000. Didn't solve it. The second shop replaced the entire steering box. Imported part, very expensive. $12,000. Didn't solve it. The third worked on steering ends, suspension A-arms, ball joints, bushings. Another $6,000. Nothing. More than $26,000 thrown away because everyone was looking in the wrong place. They were treating symptoms, not the cause. And the cause? Margaret was starting to suspect. It wasn't in the obvious steering components. It was somewhere that only revealed itself when the truck really worked, when heat took over everything, when metal expanded. She jumped up. Heat. Expansion, of course. She went back to the Mercedes and climbed into the cab again. Started the engine and let it run, watching the temperature gauge. Waited 15 minutes until the engine reached ideal working temperature. Then started testing the steering right there in the yard. Made wide turns, tight ones, sharp maneuvers, everything working perfectly. The steering responded firm, no play at all. She shut off the engine and went under the truck, laying on the hot yard ground with a flashlight in hand, started visually following the entire steering system, column, box, ends, joints. Everything seemed in place. But she wasn't looking for broken parts. She was looking for something more subtle, something that only manifested under specific conditions. She spent the rest of the morning doing short tests around Dalton. Went up and down Main Street 3 times, testing brakes, steering, suspension. Nothing. The Mercedes behaved like a perfectly adjusted truck. That's when she realized the problem wasn't going to show up there in 5-10-minute trips. It needed time, continuous mileage, accumulated heat. At lunchtime, she went back to Sebastian's office. I need to do a road test. I want to take the truck to Highway 136, that mountain stretch with 5 miles of descent. It's the only way to reproduce the problem the drivers reported. Sebastian was eating a burger at his desk and almost choked. Margaret, you're going alone on a highway with a truck that has a history of losing steering. I'm not going alone, she replied. You're coming with me. I need a witness, and I need someone who knows the vehicle's history to confirm if what I feel is the same problem. Sebastian wasn't a man of courage for these things, But he also wasn't one to refuse a challenge when it involved his own business. He put down the burger, wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up. "Let's go now." "Now," Margaret confirmed. Half an hour later, the two were in the Mercedes cabin, leaving Dalton toward Highway 136. Margaret at the wheel, Sebastian in the passenger seat tense, holding on to the support handle as if that would save his life. The truck was empty, no load, but still weighed its 7 tons. The first 20 minutes were absolutely calm. The engine roared firm, steering responded precisely, gears shifted smooth. Sebastian started relaxing a bit. "See, Margaret, this truck has nothing. It's all legend." She didn't respond. She was concentrated, attentive to every detail, every vibration, every sound. The trip odometer marked 32 miles traveled. Engine temperature was in the ideal range, between 180 and 195 degrees, everything normal. That's when they entered the mountain stretch of Highway 136. The road started descending in gentle curves, nothing too steep, but it was a long, continuous descent. 5 miles of constant decline that required attention and frequent use of engine brake. Margaret engaged a reduced gear to not force the brakes and started the descent. 35 minutes into the trip, that's when she felt it for the first time. It was subtle, very subtle, like the steering wheel had gained an extra little bit of free play. Nothing glaring, nothing that made the truck leave its trajectory, but a very slight looseness that wasn't there before. She tested it, turning the wheel lightly from one side to the other. The play was there. "Sebastian, are you feeling anything different?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. He, who had been distracted looking at the Appalachian landscape through the window, became attentive. "Feel what?" "The steering is different." Sebastian paid attention to the truck's movement. It still wasn't obvious to him, but he was starting to notice that Margaret was making micro-corrections in the trajectory more frequently. 40 minutes into the trip, the play increased. Now it was more noticeable. Margaret had to correct the trajectory constantly, and the truck seemed to float slightly on the road, as if it were on an unstable air cushion. It wasn't total loss of control. It wasn't anything catastrophic, but it was exactly the type of instability that caused panic in an experienced driver, especially on a descent loaded. "Now I'm feeling it," Sebastian said, and his voice had a thread of nervousness. "That's it. That's exactly what the drivers reported. The truck is getting soft." Margaret didn't respond. She was totally focused, controlling the vehicle firmly, but feeling that every minute the steering got looser. She looked at the odometer, 43 minutes, looked at the temperature gauge, 205 degrees, a bit above normal because of the prolonged descent and the strain of the engine brake. She made the decision, started reducing speed even more, engaging lower and lower gears, until she managed to stop the truck on a wide shoulder of the mountain. Shut off the engine immediately, pulled the parking brake and got out of the cabin before Sebastian even processed what was happening. The smell hit her as soon as she stepped on the ground. Hot oil, heated rubber, superheated metal. It was the smell of a truck that had worked hard, that had run under strain, that had heated every component to the limit. She went straight under the cabin where the steering column was, crouching down and sticking her head under the chassis, even before grabbing any tool. And that's when she touched the metal casing of the steering column that Margaret almost screamed in pain. It burned her hand. The casing was boiling, so hot it was impossible to keep her hand there for more than a second. She backed away, grabbed a thick rag from her tool bag and went back, now protecting her hand, touched again, feeling through the cloth the absurd heat radiating from there. Sebastian had gotten down too and was beside her, curious. "What is it?" "Heat," she replied, still processing the discovery. "Too much heat." She grabbed a wrench and started dismantling the heat shields that covered part of the steering column. They were thin metal plates, kind of rusty, that were supposed to protect components from engine heat, but when she removed the last shield and shone the flashlight, she saw exactly what she suspected. The steering column tube passed less than 6 inches from the exhaust pipe. 6 inches. And there was no adequate heat shield between them, no ceramic fiber shield, no thermal blanket. Nothing. The exhaust, which in prolonged running easily reached 700–900 degrees Fahrenheit, was literally roasting the steering column. "Sebastian, look at this," she called, pointing with the flashlight. He crouched down too, trying to understand. "What am I seeing?" "The problem. The steering column passes too close to the exhaust. When the truck runs a long time, when the engine works hard, the exhaust heat expands the internal shaft of the column. With expansion, the play increases between the pinion and the rack of the steering box. The hotter it gets, the bigger the play, the bigger the instability. It's that simple. It's basic physics. Hot metal expands." Sebastian was silent, processing, then asked the question that had to be asked. "But how come 5 different shops didn't see this?" Margaret stood up, cleaning the grease from her hands on the rag. "Because none of them tested the truck in real conditions. They worked with cold engine, in the yard, on short ramps. They changed parts, adjusted components, did everything right according to the manual. But the manual doesn't predict a design defect, a factory assembly error, or a bad modification someone made to the exhaust years ago. They didn't err by incompetence, Mr. Moore. They erred because they assumed the problem was where it always is, in the obvious components." She paused, looking at the Mercedes parked there on the side of the road, smoking slightly from the hood. "I only got it right because I decided to observe the truck not as a bunch of parts together, but as an organism that reacts to time and heat. And because I had the courage to put it to run for real, under pressure, until the problem appeared." Sebastian ran his hand over his face, relieved and impressed at the same time. "And now? Can it be fixed?" "Yes," Margaret replied with that confidence of someone who already knew exactly what to do. "But it won't be quick. I'm going to have to redesign the exhaust route, move it away from the column, install adequate thermal protection, and replace the column bushings with more heat-resistant material. 2–3 days of work." They returned to Dalton slowly, with the truck already starting to cool down and the steering miraculously returning to normal as the temperature dropped. It was the definitive proof Margaret needed. Over the next 2 days, Red Clay Trucking's yard became a real theater of operations. Margaret set up her improvised shop right there under the Mercedes, with the truck lifted on reinforced jackstands, tools spread on the ground, an old tarp stretched out to protect from the sun that punished since early morning. She started work before 6 a.m., when the day was still cool and natural light was beginning to brighten the Georgia sky. The first stage was the most delicate. Remove the entire exhaust system without damaging the chassis welds, without breaking the supports, because she was going to need to reposition everything later. And look, truck exhaust ain't no toy. It's thick steel pipes, heavy, covered with black soot accumulated over years of use, held by rusty clamps that didn't want to come loose at all. Margaret worked lying on her back on the ground, arms stretched upward, using a pneumatic impact wrench to loosen the stuck bolts. The metallic noise echoed through the yard, making the drivers who arrived early to get their trucks stopped to watch. There was something fascinating about seeing that woman down there. Concentrated, sweaty, muttering curse words under her breath when some bolt insisted on not coming out, but never giving up. By 9 a.m., she had managed to remove the entire exhaust, dragged the heavy assembly out, cleaned it with solvent, and stretched it on the yard floor to be able to measure and plan the modifications. The problem was clear now, seen from outside. The original exhaust route made a very tight curve right after the manifold, passing under the cabin, exactly where the steering column was. Someone, at some point in the truck's life, had made a modification to that exhaust, probably trying to gain space or get around some other problem, and ended up creating this deadly defect. Sebastian appeared mid-morning with coffee and a warm biscuit. "Brought you a snack." "You making it?" Margaret accepted the coffee, sat on the running board of the neighbouring truck and took a bite of the biscuit. It was delicious, warm, with that flaky crust and soft inside that only a southern biscuit knows how to have. "I'm making it, yeah, but it's gonna be work. I'm gonna have to redo the entire exhaust route, make it go through another path, further from the column. I'm gonna need to weld new supports, make bends in the pipe, adapt everything." "You know how to weld?" Sebastian asked, kind of impressed. She smiled in that way of hers, like someone who already expected the question. "Mr. Moore, a mechanic who doesn't know how to weld is like a cook who doesn't know how to light the stove. I learned from my father. I have level 2 welder certification from AWS. You can rest easy." And it was true. Margaret wasn't one of those mechanics who only diagnosed and sent someone else to execute. She got her hands dirty from beginning to end, mastered every stage of the process. She had spent years working alone precisely because of this. She didn't like depending on third parties. She liked having total control over the quality of the service. In the afternoon, she went to an automotive parts store downtown and bought everything she needed. 6 feet of exhaust pipe of adequate diameter, reinforced clamps, new rubber supports, specific weld for high temperature, and a state-of-the-art ceramic fiber thermal blanket, the kind used in racing vehicles that can withstand up to 1,500 degrees without degrading. She came back to the trucking company and spent the rest of the afternoon measuring, cutting, adjusting. The challenge was to make the exhaust go through a path that maintained at least 16 inches of distance from the steering column, without interfering with any other component, without losing efficiency in gas flow, without creating stress points in the metal that could crack over time. She worked with the precision of a watchmaker, marking each welding point, each bend angle, each support position. The red clay drivers started gathering around, curious, asking questions. Old Joe, a veteran with 20 years on the road, calloused hands and face marked by the sun, stood there watching for almost an hour. "Miss Margaret, you really think that's it? That the problem was the heat?" She didn't even lift her head from work, kept marking measurements on the pipe. "I don't think, Joe, I'm sure. I tested it, felt the problem appear, measured the temperature, confirmed it. It's not guesswork, it's diagnosis based on evidence." "And how come so many good shops didn't see this?" another driver asked. Margaret stopped then, wiped sweat from her forehead with her arm, and looked at the group that had formed there. "Because they did what everybody does. They followed standard protocol, steering problem, change hydraulic pump, change steering box, adjust tie rod ends. It's right, it's what's in the manual. Only sometimes the problem ain't in the manual. Sometimes the problem is a silly thing, a thing that only appears under specific condition. And if you don't test under that condition, you'll never find it." On the second day, Margaret started welding. And man, what beautiful work. She put on the welding mask, adjusted the torch, and started making the joints on the pipes with a precision that impressed. The weld beads came out perfect, uniform, no spatter, no flaws. Each support was fixed to the chassis with the care of someone who knows that gases at hundreds of degrees pass there and that any error can be fatal. The smell of molten metal took over the yard, that characteristic smell of welding that mixes with smoke and gets embedded in clothes. Sparks jumped everywhere, illuminating the space under the truck like it was a fireworks show. Margaret worked at her own pace, without hurry but without pause, checking each point 2-3 times before considering it finished. When she finally finished repositioning the entire exhaust system, it was already mid-afternoon of the second day. The new pipe route now passed on the other side of the chassis, well away from the steering column, with smooth curves that didn't create resistance to gas flow. She had installed 3 new rubber supports that absorbed vibration and allowed natural expansion of the metal with heat. But she still wasn't finished. The most important part was missing: thermal protection. Margaret grabbed the ceramic fiber blanket she had bought and started wrapping the entire steering column region, creating a double barrier between residual engine heat and sensitive components. She fixed everything with special stainless steel clamps that don't oxidize and don't loosen over time. Lastly came the bushing replacement. The original steering column bushings were nylon, a material that works well under normal conditions, but that softens and deforms when exposed to excessive heat. Margaret had ordered bronze graphite bushings, a material used in heavy industrial applications that maintains mechanical properties even at very high temperatures. Changing the bushings required disassembling part of the steering column, delicate work that required total attention. She worked alone in silence, with that deep concentration of someone who knows that an error there can compromise everything else. She removed the old bushings, which really showed signs of thermal deformation when observed up close, cleaned each contact surface with steel brush and solvent, and installed the new bushings with a light coat of special high-temperature grease. When she finished, it was past 5 p.m. Margaret was exhausted, dirty from head to toe, with black grease under her nails and weld stains on her coveralls, but she had a discreet smile on her face, that smile of someone who knows they did a job well done. She called Sebastian. "I'm done. Now we need to test." This time, Sebastian didn't hesitate. He climbed into the cabin with her, and the two left again toward Highway 136, to the same mountain stretch where they had felt the problem 2 days before. Several trucking company drivers stayed in the yard, waiting for the result like it was a championship final. The difference was felt from the beginning. The Mercedes was different. The engine's roar was cleaner, freer, as if the entire vehicle had been unclogged. Margaret drove the same routes as before, passed through the same 40 minutes that had been critical in the first test. Nothing. The steering remained firm, precise, without any play. They entered the mountain stretch and went down all 5 miles using engine brake, demanding from the vehicle, making it work. They reached the bottom of the mountain, and Margaret hadn't felt a single millimeter of play in the wheel. It was like driving a brand new truck with everything adjusted, with everything responding perfectly. "So, Sebastian?" "Fixed," Margaret replied, and for the first time in 2 days relaxed her shoulders. They made the return trip, more than an hour of road, testing on climbs, descents, tight curves. The truck behaved impeccably from beginning to end. When they got back to Red Clay, it was already night, but everyone was still there waiting. When they saw Margaret get out of the cabin with that smile on her face, the crowd applauded. Sebastian got down too, ran his hand over the Mercedes hood, and looked at the truck as if witnessing a resurrection. "Margaret, I'm going to be frank with you. When you asked to try, I didn't believe it would work. I thought you were going to fail like the others. Sorry for doubting." She cleaned her hands on a rag and replied with that simplicity of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. "Don't need to apologize, Mr. Moore. You were right to doubt. This truck had defeated a lot of good people, but I didn't come here to prove anything to anybody. I came to solve a problem, and I solved it." Joe, the veteran driver who had been watching the work, approached. "Miss Margaret, I want to be the first to really test this truck with cargo on the road. Let me do the first haul." Margaret looked at Sebastian, who nodded. "Can do. Tomorrow morning load 15 tons of cotton and go to Chattanooga. If anything happens, you call." The next morning, Red Clay's yard was busy since early. Old Joe arrived before 6, anxious like a boy on Christmas Eve, checking every detail of the Mercedes that now shone under the dim dawn light. Margaret had spent part of the previous night cleaning the truck, washing the body, removing that layer of red clay dust that made the vehicle look abandoned. The white paint, even faded by time, came back to show with dignity. The load was already separated, 15 tons of cotton bales. production from a farm near Dalton, bound for the textile mills in Chattanooga. It was a route Joe knew by heart. He had done that route hundreds of times in his life, knew every curve, every bump, every dangerous stretch. But this time was different. This time he was taking the truck nobody wanted, the vehicle that had earned a reputation as cursed, and that now, according to Margaret, was cured. While the loading crew stacked the bales on the trailer, tying everything with those reinforced blue tarps, Margaret did one last inspection, ran her hand over the thermal protection she had installed, checked each weld point on the exhaust, tested the steering play, turning the wheel with the engine off. "All perfect, Joe," she called, and the driver approached. "The truck is ready, but I need you to do me a favor. If you feel anything strange, anything at all out of the ordinary, stop and call me right away. I don't want to take risks." Joe nodded seriously. "You got it, Miss Margaret. I'll stay alert, but I have a good feeling. This truck is different. You can feel it." At 7 o'clock sharp, with the sun already rising strong on the Georgia horizon, Joe started the Mercedes engine. The roar was clean, powerful, healthy. He engaged first gear, waved to the crowd that had gathered to see the departure, and slowly left the yard loaded, heading to the highway. Margaret stood there, watching the truck disappear around the avenue curve, with that mix of confidence and apprehension that every professional feels when they put their work to the test in the real world. Sebastian came beside her. "Nervous?" "A little," she admitted, "not because of the repair. I know I did it right. But there's always that little chill in your stomach, you know? It's a lot of responsibility." The following hours passed slowly. Margaret tried to keep busy, organizing tools, cleaning the space she had used, but her head was there on the road with Joe. Every time her phone rang, her heart raced, but they were just normal calls, quotes, questions from other customers. Noon passed. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The trip to Chattanooga took about 3 hours under normal conditions. So it was still early to expect news, but the silence was starting to weigh. Margaret ate lunch without tasting the food, checked her phone every 5 minutes. 3:30 p.m. The phone rang. It was Joe. Margaret answered on the first ring. "So, Joe, everything okay?" On the other end of the line, the driver's voice came loaded with an emotion he didn't try to hide. "Miss Margaret, I'm here in Chattanooga, just finished unloading. And look, I'm going to tell you something with all sincerity. This truck is new. No, it's better than new. I drove 90 miles, went through mountains, went through that steep climb after Lookout, went down everything loaded. The steering didn't give a single bit of play, firm from beginning to end. I even forgot it was the same Mercedes that had the problem. It seems like a different vehicle." Margaret felt a huge weight lift from her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a second, breathed deep. "That's good, Joe. That's really good. And the engine? How's the overall behavior?" "It's wonderful. The exhaust you redid left the engine freer. Seems like it breathes better. The pickup is stronger. The fuel consumption must have improved. It's impressive the difference a well-done service makes. You're a wizard, Miss Margaret. Your daddy and your husband would be proud of you." She thanked him, said goodbye, and hung up. She stood there for a moment, alone in the yard, letting the emotion rise. It wasn't just professional satisfaction of having solved a complex problem. It was something deeper, the feeling of having given dignity back to a vehicle everyone had given up on, of having proven that knowledge and dedication beat any bad reputation, any superstition, any disbelief. Sebastian came running from the office. "So, he called. Everything worked. The truck is perfect." The trucking owner punched the air, celebrating. "I knew it. I knew you'd do it, Margaret. You can't imagine what this means to me. That Mercedes was dead weight, money thrown away. Now it goes back to being an asset, goes back to working, goes back to making profit." But the story didn't stop there, because good news spreads fast, especially in a small town where everyone knows everyone. That same afternoon, the mechanic from George's garage, old George himself, who had refused the service, showed up at Red Clay. He came with his tail between his legs, wanting to see with his own eyes what Margaret had done. "Ma'am," he said, taking off his old cap in front of her as a sign of respect, "I came here to apologize. When Sebastian came to me, I refused the service because I thought there was no solution. Now I'm hearing you solved it. How'd you do it?" Margaret didn't hold grudges. She explained the problem, showed the modifications she had made, detailed the diagnostic process. George listened attentively, shaking his head impressed. "Exhaust heat expanding the steering column. Good Lord, I never thought of that, and look, I got 40 years in the shop." "We learn every day, don't we?" Margaret confirmed. "And there's no shame in not knowing something. The shame is in not trying to learn." Over the next week, the Mercedes made 3 more hauls: Dalton to Nashville, Dalton to Birmingham, Dalton to Memphis. Always loaded, always running heavy, always facing mountains, climbs, descents, and always behaving perfectly. Joe became the truck's official driver and started spreading the story around, at gas stations, at rest stops, at roadside diners where truckers gather. That Mercedes that was cursed is running like a dream. Margaret, that mechanic from Dalton, found the problem. The thing had the exhaust passing close to the steering, heated everything up and caused play. She redid everything, put thermal protection, changed the bushings. Now it's better than new. The story became road legend. And with road legend comes clientele. 3 months after the repair, Red Clay had a full schedule just from services that came for Margaret's name. Trucking companies from Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, all wanting technical consulting, difficult diagnoses, problems other shops couldn't solve. Sebastian wasn't foolish. He saw there was an opportunity he couldn't waste. One Friday afternoon, he called Margaret into the office, served coffee, and went straight to business. "Margaret, I have a proposal for you. I want you to come in as partner in the trucking company. You don't need to put in money. Come in with technical knowledge. I take care of administrative and commercial. You take care of the shop. We split profits. You in?" Margaret picked up the coffee cup, took a sip, thought for a moment. Partnership was serious commitment, shared responsibility, giving up part of autonomy. But it was also opportunity to grow, to have structure, to do bigger work. "I'm in," she replied, "but with one condition." "What?" Sebastian asked, curious. "That we never, ever refuse a job because we think it's impossible. If someone comes here with a problem that seems to have no solution, we try. Even if we fail, we try. Because it was trying the impossible that got us here." Sebastian extended his hand. "Deal." The two shook hands, sealing a partnership that went far beyond papers and contracts. It was a partnership based on mutual respect, on shared values, on courage to face challenges. And the Mercedes became a walking billboard for the shop. Sebastian had the truck repainted, bright white, and stamped on the trailer in huge letters: "Red Clay Trucking, Specialized Shop. Impossible problems are our specialty." Below, in smaller but still visible letters, "Margaret Hayes Mechanics, Advanced Technical Diagnostics." Every time the Mercedes passed on the highway, other drivers honked, waved, pointed. It was the truck that had been resurrected, the vehicle that had proven there's no such thing as a haunted machine, just poorly diagnosed machines. Times after the day Margaret fixed the Mercedes, Red Clay Trucking had transformed into something much bigger than a simple freight company. The yard, which before housed only 8 trucks, now had 15 vehicles, a covered shop with new equipment, and a waiting list of clients coming from neighboring states just to consult with Margaret about problems nobody else could solve. But what really changed wasn't the company's size. It was what happened with the people around. There was a girl named Jessica, 19 years old, who worked as an attendant at a highway gas station. She saw the Mercedes pass every week, saw that phrase written on the trailer about impossible problems, and one day gathered courage to look for Margaret. She showed up at Red Clay one Thursday afternoon, shy, fidgeting with her hands, with that way of someone who doesn't know if they'll be well received. "Miss Margaret," she began, voice low. "I've always liked messing with engines since I was little. My dad has an old motorcycle stored in the garage, and I'm there taking it apart, trying to understand how it works. But everyone says this isn't woman's work, that I should look for an office job, those things. Then I saw you working here, saw the story of the truck you fixed and thought, if she did it, why can't I try?" Margaret had her hands dirty with grease. She had just finished changing the oil filter on a truck, but she dropped everything right then. She cleaned her hands on a rag and looked at Jessica with that total attention she gave to important things. "Jessica, let me tell you something. When I started at 15, I also heard it wasn't my place, that the shop was a man's environment, that I was going to get dirty, that I was going to get hurt, that I'd never be taken seriously. You know what I did? I ignored it. I learned, I worked, I proved in practice that knowledge doesn't have gender. An engine doesn't know if who's fixing it is a man or woman. An engine only knows if the person understands or doesn't understand." Jessica's eyes shone. "So you think I can do it?" "I don't think. I'm sure. But I'm going to tell you, the path isn't easy. You're going to have to study a lot. You're going to have to prove yourself every day. You're going to have to be better than average just to be considered equal. But if you really love this, if you feel that thing in your chest when you see an engine running, then it's worth every drop of sweat." Jessica became Margaret's first apprentice. She started helping with basic tasks, organizing tools, cleaning parts, observing every movement. Margaret taught with patience, explaining not just how to do it, but why to do it, showing that mechanics wasn't just repeating memorized procedures, but understanding the logic behind each system. And it wasn't just Jessica. Sandra showed up, 35 years old, mother of 2, who had lost her job at the clothing factory and wanted a new profession. Beatrice appeared, recently graduated in mechanical engineering, who couldn't get a job because all companies wanted to hire men for the technical area. Mrs. Louise showed up, 52 years old, who always had curiosity about engines but never had the chance to learn. Margaret welcomed them all, not all at once because she didn't have structure for that, but gradually as the shop grew. Some came just to take a basic automotive maintenance course she started giving on Saturdays. Others stayed as helpers, learning day to day, getting real shop experience. Sebastian observed all this with a mix of pride and surprise. One Monday morning, drinking coffee in the office while watching Margaret teach Jessica to calibrate valves on a diesel engine, he commented, "Margaret, you're training an entire generation of female mechanics. In a few years, Dalton will be known for this." She cleaned her hands on her coveralls and smiled. "It's not about training female mechanics, Mr. Moore. It's about showing girls they can choose, that they don't need to accept what others say is woman's work or man's work. They can choose what makes their heart beat faster, what brings real satisfaction. And if it's working on engines, great. If it's something else, great too. The important thing is being able to choose." Red Clay's fame kept growing. The Mercedes case had become a national reference in heavy mechanics forums on the internet, WhatsApp groups of trucking companies, lectures at technical courses. Margaret was invited to teach classes at the Technical College in Atlanta, sharing not just the specific truck case, but the diagnostic methodology she used. Observe the vehicle as a complete organism, test in real conditions, don't accept the obvious without questioning. The Mercedes. That truck became almost a family member. It kept running strong, accumulating miles, transporting loads. Joe continued as the vehicle's official driver and developed an almost paternal affection for that machine. He washed it every weekend, did preventive maintenance with Margaret personally, took care of it like it was his own. One October afternoon, almost a year after the repair, a reporter from the local TV station showed up at Red Clay, wanting to do a story about the mechanic who resurrected the cursed truck. Margaret didn't like appearing much, preferred to let the work speak for itself, but Sebastian insisted it would be good for the company, for the town, for the cause. The story aired on a Friday on the regional news. They showed Margaret working, teaching the apprentices, explaining the Mercedes case. They showed Joe talking about how the truck was running perfectly. They showed Jessica, the first apprentice, now already doing simple maintenance alone, saying with tears in her eyes, "Margaret changed my life. She showed me I can be whatever I want." The reaction was immediate. The trucking company's phone rang non-stop for days. More girls wanting to learn, more companies wanting to hire consulting, more trucking companies wanting to solve complex problems. But criticism also came. People saying that was pushing it, that women in shops was a fad, that it would pass soon. Margaret didn't waste time answering criticism. She kept working, kept teaching, kept proving in practice that competence isn't about who you are, but about how much you dedicate yourself to learning. 2 years after fixing the Mercedes, Red Clay inaugurated its own technical school, small but well-equipped, offering free basic mechanics courses focused on training professionals for the transportation market. The first class had 12 students, 8 were women. At the opening ceremony, simple, just with students' families and some company partners, Sebastian asked Margaret to say something. She hadn't prepared a speech. It wasn't her style. But she went up on the small improvised stage and spoke from the heart. "Folks, I'm not good with pretty words, so I'm going to talk the way I know how. 2 years ago, a truck that everyone had given up on arrived here. A truck that carried a bad reputation that nobody wanted to even see from afar. I didn't fix that truck because I'm special or because I know more than others. I fixed it because I refused to believe anything was impossible. And what I learned from that Mercedes was that sometimes we give up too fast, accept defeat before it's time, believe the bad reputation without investigating the truth. This course here isn't about training mechanics. It's about training people who don't give up, who don't accept the impossible, who have courage to look at the problem a different way. Welcome, and remember, cursed trucks don't exist. What exists is a challenge waiting to be solved." In the back of the yard, parked in a position of honor, the Mercedes-Benz 1850 shone under the afternoon sun. Impeccable white paint, gleaming chrome, engine purring low. It wasn't the truck nobody wanted anymore. It was the truck that had taught a lesson that all of Dalton would never forget. And Margaret went back to the shop right after the speech. She put on the coveralls that were already worn from so much use, grabbed the worn but reliable tools, and went to take care of a new problem that had arrived that morning. A truck with power loss that 3 shops had already looked at without success. Because for her, it didn't matter how many stories were told about her work, how many TV features appeared, how many awards might come. What mattered was the next engine waiting for diagnosis, the next machine needing attention, the next impossible asking to be solved. There she went, with her hands dirty with black grease, the smell of diesel oil in the air, the metallic sound of tools echoing through the yard, doing exactly what she loved doing since she was 15 years old. Giving life back to machines others had abandoned, proving every day that reputation is built with honest work, solid knowledge, and courage to face what seems impossible. And the Mercedes, which nobody wanted to see again, had become the symbol that always, it's worth trying one more time. Ensinamento final. My friends, this story teaches us something powerful that goes far beyond engines and trucks. Margaret didn't just fix a Mercedes-Benz that day. She fixed something much more important. She fixed the belief that some problems are impossible, just because smart people before us couldn't solve them. See, in life we all face our own cursed Mercedes, that challenge everyone says can't be done, that dream people laugh at, that goal that seems too far. And you know what makes the difference? It's not being the smartest or having the most resources. It's having the courage to look at the problem from a different angle. It's refusing to accept impossible as the final answer. It's being willing to get your hands dirty and test things under real conditions, not just in theory. Margaret lost her father. She lost her husband. She could have given up, could have accepted that life had defeated her, but she chose to keep going, to use the pain as fuel, to honor those she lost by refusing to quit. And that's the lesson, my friend. Your biggest victories often come disguised as your biggest challenges. That impossible problem you're facing right now, maybe it just needs someone brave enough to look at it differently, someone like you. So next time someone tells you something can't be done, remember the widow who fixed the widowmaker. Remember that cursed trucks don't exist, only challenges waiting for someone courageous enough to solve them. Don't forget to subscribe to Underrated Mechanics, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments, what's your cursed Mercedes? What impossible are you facing right now? I want to know your story. God bless you, and remember, with faith, courage, and the right approach, nothing is impossible.